Thank you so much for joining National Farm Worker Ministry for our webinar about H2A guest workers, what consumers need to know. I'm Rose Green Flores with the ministry, and we are happy to have you today on World Food Day. We selected this day to raise awareness about hunger needs across the world. I would like to introduce our presenters. We have Casey Farmer. She's a staff attorney with the Immigrant and Language Rights Center at Indiana Legal Services. Her legal practice focuses on humanitarian immigration relief, including temporary protected status, T and U visas, asylum, and farm worker law. Casey serves on the board of Society of St. Andrew, which focuses on ending food waste and hunger. Another speaker is Joe Martinez. He is the executive director for Cierto, a nonprofit farm worker recruitment and training organization that recruits, trains, and dispatches farm workers to agricultural employers in Mexico and the United States. This model offers a safe recruitment and labor compliance verification assurance system that protects farm workers from fraud, trafficking, and slave conditions. Joe has worked closely with NGOs, the US, and foreign governments to address issues related to how farm workers are recruited and dispatched to the US and to establish labor agreements between Mexico and Guatemalan state governments and the United Farm Workers. We also have Elizabeth Rodriguez, sorry about that. She's the Director of Farm Worker Advocacy at National Farm Worker Ministry, which has been connecting people of faith and conscience to farm worker-led movements for over 50 years. Elizabeth is based out of Texas, where she has been advocating for farm worker justice for years. At the end, we will have time for questions and answers, but we encourage you to click the Q&A button and to ask questions as you're thinking of them so you don't forget them. So please go ahead and start putting in your Q&A. If you do have any tech difficulties, please go ahead and put that in the chat or the Q&A if you need to, whatever works for you. You can also email, and I'll put it in the chat, admin@nfwm.org, and we'll try to get whatever technical problem sorted out for you. So thank you so much. And Elizabeth, go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Rose. And before I start, I just want to repeat that this webinar has live interpretation. So to join the interpretation, please press the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and select the language of your preference. Este seminario cuenta con interpretación en vivo. Para acceder a la interpretación, por favor, de presionar el icono del globo al fondo de la pantalla y elegir el idioma de su preferencia. So, bienvenidos. Thank you. Welcome everybody to this informative session. Thank you for being here. And today we're going to talk about the H2A Guest Worker Program. I'm Elizabeth, and I'm super excited to be here with our guests and to hear from them about the wealth of information, that they are going to be sharing with us today. So before we move on and hear from them, let me just provide a brief background on, I'm going to provide a brief background on the Guest Worker Program, the history of farm workers in America. We all know that farmers struggled to find employees that are willing to work in this industry. With low wages, long hours, in hazardous climates and environments, all of us understand why. The Guest Worker Program was enacted in 1986. It's a replacement of the Bracero program that was enacted between 1942 and 1964. It's a product of the agricultural industry that has historically been dependent on imported labor. After African Americans left the industry for others, it was the Chinese and Japanese that contributed to the workforce, but also to the methods of farming improving the high production system that we currently have. After the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, it was then the Filipinos. And after the Filipinos, it was the Mexicans. So America has used a variety of slave labor to keep costs low and productions high. Um, I just want to let everybody know that if you want to learn more about farm worker history, you can visit our website, nationalfarmworkerministry.org, and you can learn more, read in depth about farm workers and their history. So this program, the guest worker program, it allows farmers to recruit and provide the labor that they need from other countries for the time needed, and then send them back once the season ends. It's how the American agricultural industry has led in profits in the economy. So, who are the farm workers in America? Who are the people that are working for in the agricultural industry? Currently, the U.S. employs 2.4 million in the agricultural industry. They work on farms, packing sheds, ranches with crops and livestock. The products of their work extends and are used by so many other industries. Farm workers do not just feed the nation. They are providing the materials that are needed to manufacture products that are used daily. So 68% of the workforce of farm workers are foreign born. 38% of them lack work permits. They have low levels of education. Many speak indigenous language. Therefore, there are language barriers, and they fall under a piece rate pay, which means getting paid for what they can produce, not hourly. They work more than 40 hours weekly with no overtime pay. They work in harsh weather conditions around dangerous pesticides and in dangerous environments in isolated rural areas that are difficult for emergency services to reach and away from public view. So, the labor rights protections, what rights do these workers have? The FLSA, the Federal Labor Standard Act, passed in 1938, excluded farm workers, allowing the piece rate pay and no overtime pay. Much like self employment, they have to work daily with minimal security. 5 states so far have voted and currently offer overtime, sick, and paid leave to farm workers: Washington, Oregon, California, Minnesota, and New York. The current administration has presented new policies to protect H2As against retaliation and promote a safer working environment. However, it was blocked in 17 states that believe that the National Labor Relations Act should be changed at the federal level. And so, what are the requirements? What are the requirements for the H2A program? Before they apply for guest workers, farmers have to meet a certain criteria. They can't just request a foreign worker. They have to prove that there's no local workforce by providing evidence of employment announcements that have gone unanswered. And even when they are approved to apply for foreign workers, farmers must always prioritize legal residents who are seeking employment. If and when approved by they farmers must abide by the H2A visa petition process, which requires that they pay USCIS fees per applicant. Employers must provide a contract that details how they will cover costs for travel to work, from site to site, and of course, transportation to and from work. The contract has to have detailed information about their housing, living conditions, ensuring that they are meeting the adequate utilities and that they have electricity and water, restrooms, bathing facilities, with cooking facilities, or if meals are going to be provided. So contracts have, they also have an estimate of the earnings and work schedule, which includes hourly pay and seasonal expectations. So much like previous labor programs, this program is also becoming increasingly concerning. It's raising many red flags, which require a deeper understanding of what is happening with this program. And we're going to talk about some serious concerns. Reports of contract violations are what we see increasing every day. This in these past couple of years, it's been more than 400. Half of all the violations that are being reported in the agricultural industry are being reported by H2A workers. Amongst these serious concerns, we have wage theft. Almost 4 million was recovered last year alone in unpaid wages for H2A workers. Living and exploitative working conditions. So a lot of these workers, what they're facing is they're facing overcrowding in their living conditions. You can see large numbers of people staying in um, apartments or um, hotel rooms. Their exploitative working conditions are working longer than the hours that they were being told that they were going to work. There's discrimination in the hiring mainly men from ages 20 to 45 over women or older adults. And there is a serious concern amongst retaliation. Workers have a fear of speaking up, fear that they will be blacklisted, that they will not be allowed to return or to apply with another employer. And so those are some of the concerns, but we have other major concerns, including a dramatic increase in petitions from 14,000 in 2015 to almost 400,000 in 2022. The agricultural system is becoming dependent on a program that was meant to cover gaps, not provide the entire workforce. It is also on the top 10 industries for human trafficking. In the past 5 years, Polaris has identified over 3,200 H2A visa holders who have been victims of human trafficking. In addition to trafficking, the trafficking hotline also identified more than 4,850 victims of one form of labor exploitation, which is either wage theft, contract violations, discriminations that don't reach the force, fraud, or coercion threshold of human trafficking. So, with an increase in the reports of prison like treatments, this program has become a spotlight on how America treats its essential workers. Now, I'm going to turn it over to our guests so that we can hear from them and their experiences working with H2A workers. Welcome, Casey.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Farmer. I'm a staff attorney with Indiana Legal Services. Just to give you kind of a brief overview of what our Legal Aid Society does, we provide free legal services for indigent residents of Indiana. We cover the entire state, so we help people that are low income exclusively, and we don't charge our clients for any of our services. And then just very basically, some of the things that we handle are basically any kind of civil representation. So consumer law, landlord tenant, expungements and vacature, public benefits, family law, veterans assistance, and where I work is in the immigration department. Can I get next slide, please? Elizabeth, thank you. I didn't know if you could hear me. I work in the Immigrants and Language Rights Center. We call it the ILRC. I am the attorney that exclusively handles anything that stems from a farm worker case. So typically that is individuals that are coming to the United States on H-2A and H-2B visas. We have a specific portion of our project that's dedicated to doing outreach to farm workers. Our outreach manager goes to farms across the state of Indiana and just provides them with information about their legal rights, asks them about pay, asks them about living conditions, if there are any kinds of issues with their documentation, like their passports, we can help them with that. A lot of times that will kind of transcend into the labor trafficking sphere, which is also a portion of my job. A lot of the victims of labor trafficking that I do represent were coming to the United States on an H-2A or an H-2B visa. Primarily, these workers are in very secluded parts of the state where they don't have access to resources, they don't have access to other individuals that speak their language. Sometimes there are different language barriers with indigenous languages, not just Spanish speakers. But a lot of the labor trafficking that I see predominantly comes from the seasonal workers. And those are typically people coming from Central and South America and Mexico. And in terms of immigration relief that I typically work with for the H-2A workers, a lot of times I help them with reporting their either trafficking or their non-payment of wages, those sorts of things to the appropriate agency. So that's often the Wage and Hour Division of the Department of Labor. Sometimes it's the Department of Workforce Development if it's a housing conditions sort of issue. And then if it rises to the level of labor trafficking, we can also pursue immigration relief for them as a basis. So a lot of my work is centric to the T visa, which, as I think it was mentioned on the second to last slide, the force, fraud, or coercion aspect, that is the basis for the T visa. So if they have experienced anything like that as a result of their employment, whether that be in a farm worker capacity or in like an H-2B kind of job, we can do a T visa for them and get them residency in the United States. There are some other options for H-2A workers as well. Sometimes a U visa is applicable, and then just other generic humanitarian cases that we take are asylum, temporary protected status, and special immigrant juvenile status, which is a special thing just for children. So mostly it is the intersection with H-2A and labor trafficking is kind of the area that I practice in most. And at the end, when we do Q&A, I'm happy to answer any questions about immigration relief, humanitarian relief, all of that stuff. Thank you.
All right. No, well, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Julie, for the invitation to share a little bit. I mean, as you guys heard, right, the H-2A program was created in the 80s as a last-ditch effort to supply labor needs. And I think the reality of what we recognize, and when you look at those statistics, right, 38% are undocumented. When you look at 2.1 million, you're looking at roughly 700, 800,000 people currently. When I first got into this work back in 2008 and 10, we only had 80,000, 88,000 H-2A workers at the time. And at that time, right, still having roughly a 2.1 million agricultural workforce in the United States, 1.6 million of those farm workers were undocumented. So I want folks to keep in mind, right, agriculture has been an industry that's been heavily predicated on a vulnerable population. And so when I started working at the United Farm Workers, I was tasked with trying to figure out how are farm workers arriving to the United States and recognizing that so many folks that work in agriculture are undocumented and have arrived here in different ways and forms. And so that's what led me to really explore the H-2A program. And as being a part of the farm worker movement, our thought was, well, what's something that we can do to try to improve this area, knowing that guest worker programs are rife with corruption. One of the biggest issues being that there's always a lack of jurisdiction. There are folks that say, oh, well, once the workers arrive in the US, we're going to treat them right. And as you can see, we still have wage theft, we still have coercion, and we still have problems. And some of the problems that Cierto focuses on that I'll get into sharing of who we are is how do workers arrive? How do they hear about this work in the communities of origin? How did they know about this opportunity? And were they given the appropriate information to be able to access this job in a way that ensures their dignity and their rights? And the reality is that for most, that's not the case. So my name is Joe Martinez, and I'm the executive director of Cierto. Cierto is a 501c3 nonprofit that was created in 2014 while I was at the United Farm Workers. I was tasked with creating this organization as a solution to bring transparency and oversight to our guest worker program. A little bit of background here is that the reality is that recruitment itself kind of exists in the shadows. So a lot of folks don't know how folks get recruited. And many times workers don't know who are recruiting them. And that's where you start to get the beginning of a lot of this indentured servitude, this debt peonage, where workers tend to pay a fee to an individual that's promising them a job, even though they have yet to receive a contract. And so what we're dedicated is how can we create a model that ensures an ethical and honest recruitment model where we're recruiting people, we're training them and helping them know where they're going and what they're doing. We really recruit over the visas, H-2A visas, H-2B visas, and TN. Like I shared, we're a nonprofit. We're also in existence in the United States as a nonprofit. We have an Asociación Civil in Mexico, and we also have a foundation in Guatemala. Each of those specifically created knowing the regulatory framework and the legal framework that exists within each country to know how to navigate and ensure that we can protect workers. Another aspect too about our recruiting and consulting services is that most of the time recruitment here is plagued by subcontractors. And so what ends up happening is that you may have a farmer that's well-intentioned wanting to bring workers to their farm. They hire an agent such as myself, who then subcontracts someone else in Mexico, who then subcontracts someone else in a community of origin to bring workers. And it's that type of subcontracting where you don't have complete oversight, you don't know how other actors are operating, that ends up allowing for bad recruitment practices to happen and workers to suffer, right? And end up subsidizing the cost of recruitment. If we go to the next slide. So just to share a little bit about our approach, is we really believe in transformational recruitment, specifically coming from the United Farm Workers and the farm worker movement. What we really need to figure out is how can we give workers the tools to be able to utilize their voice and exercise. Now, I'll tell you guys right now, the H-2A program is fundamentally flawed in the sense that workers don't have an incentive to air their grievances to their only employer. They're connected to one employer and don't have the opportunity to just switch employers easily. So that reality makes it really difficult for workers to want to speak up and share any issues that happen through the duration of their contract. So Cierto really focuses on having a comprehensive pre-arrival training that's done in the community of origin. We do this by actually partnering with local NGOs, such as folks like at National Farm Worker Ministry. We have equivalent organizations and allied members down in Mexico and in Guatemala, such as La Dimensión Movilidad Pastoral Humana. It could be different farm worker networks, human rights and NGO organizations that will accompany us in the community, who know the people in their community and listen to what we're offering. And they ensure and speak with those workers and families to ensure that when those workers migrate and travel, they actually receive the job offer that Cierto offered them, and then in turn conduct another verification while they're at the farm and when they return. All of this is done so that we can have a continuous improvement process and facilitate a relationship with the employer. So many times what happens with recruitment is it's based on how cheap you can bring me a worker, and making this completely transactional and treating farm workers as a widget and just a bottom line on their economic budget. But the reality is that we're trying to demonstrate that workers should be recognized for the expertise they bring into the supply chain, and how workers can actually be key in bringing transparency, compliance, and certifications on board, and ensuring that we as an ecosystem can all work together to ensure this transparency. As an organization and as a recruiter, which our staff reluctantly refused to call ourselves for many years, is what we're trying to demonstrate is how a recruiter should operate. We're internationally endorsed. We work very closely with the International Labor Organization, the International Office of Migration. We've been working closely with Walmart, Costco, McDonald's, purely for trying to bring folks a reality that there is an alternative to the way recruitment's currently done. Alongside that as well, we really focus on being able to offer a suite of services or be able to support folks that already have maybe a recruitment system in place. And then lastly, we also are encouraging folks to understand what certifications exist. Clearview is a certification that comes out of the United Kingdom that's now in the United States and in North America through Stronger Together. And we were just certified as a recruiter. And then we also just received our IRIS certification, which is a certification from the UN, specifically the International Office of Migration. And these are just initial certifications that are beginning to come out. And just to let you know, right, to keep in mind, for the UN certification, we're the second organization in the world to be certified. So that's kind of where we're at when it comes to it. We know folks have been migrating for a long time, but the reality is that we haven't focused on this issue very often, and we haven't put the attention to it. And now that we see the current political climate, the current rhetoric against immigrants and migrants, what we've seen a lot of times is our politics utilize these programs as bargaining chips, where they say, hey, we'll help increase legal pathways of migration while we try to clean up the undocumented workforce, right? And it's in that place too that we sometimes see the H-2A program being utilized to displace farm workers that are here already. So there's many challenges associated with this. And the reason we were created humbly from the United Farm Workers was to try to figure out how can we at least shed some light and demonstrate how this could be done well, even with all the discontents that we heard earlier. So I appreciate you guys listening. I'm happy to answer any questions. But ultimately, the reason we do this, right, is because we want dreams achieved. And I wanted to just share this, right? So I know that I was trying to translate this onto the site, so it wasn't perfect, it's a little pixelated. But on the bottom right-hand corner, this last January, I was able to bring Costco's executive leadership and their buying team down to Mexico. And to mind you, this is one of the first times that a retailer has brought their executive purchasing team to come down and see how farm workers are recruited. In that, I wanted them to hear the story of Aldo Cesar Sanchez Espinosa. He's a farm worker who's college educated in Tlaxcala, who was making $4.20 an hour before he started the H-2A program. We were able to help get him recruited, and he's been working with us for the last 5 years. And so what we really do with workers is help them build a plan, un plan de vida. If you're going to migrate, you know you don't want to. But if you're going to do this, how can we make sure that the H-2A program does not abuse you and ends up being a benefit to you and your community and your family? And over these last 5 years, I'm proud to say that he's been able to earn $19.25 an hour while coming on the H-2A program, has been able to move up into middle class, become an entrepreneur, where he's now built these creperie shops. And so what we do in these Plan de Vida training sessions is we help workers figure out what's the purpose of your migration and how do we help you build a budget that ends up helping you achieve those dreams. And it is expected that Aldo will be able to retire from the H-2A program in 7 to 8 years, so in 2 to 3 years more, where he'll be able to have a chain of about 12 creperies, each named after his kids, and he's now able to put them into school and one into college. And this is the type of impact that we're wanting folks to be able to demonstrate through the H-2A program. And that's our hope, is that we can at least demonstrate a positive approach in a way that this should be done, knowing that there continues to be a lot of issues that surround us, and knowing that there's not very many ethical recruiters that exist out there, not just in North America, but globally. So I appreciate you all taking the time. Hope you continue to ask the questions and figure out how are our farm workers arriving here? How are they being treated at farms? Because those are the produce that you're purchasing and that you're congesting, and recognizing that we're either taking part of the system or helping to improve it. Thank you. So let's take action.
Thank you, Joe and Casey, for talking about your experiences and all the work that you're doing. That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. And of course, yes, for everybody that's here joining us today, there's plenty of opportunity to take action. You can talk to your legislators about the H-2A reform. You can also talk to them about immigration reform. Support worker-led campaigns and support food certification programs and union contracts. And if you want to learn more, like I stated before, or if you want to sign up for any of those actions, visit our website. Go to nationalfarmworkerministry.org online. You can also visit our YouTube or our social media pages. Give us a like, please. Like our page and share the information. We want to bring more attention to this issue. We don't hear enough about farm workers. We don't get to hear enough about where our food comes from. Who are these people that really lay down the foundation for our economy and our country? And we need to bring more awareness to their experiences. Rose?
Yeah, so right now, we just got a question come in. So I was going to say there's no questions, but we got one. What percentage of H-2A workers want to immigrate? And what is the process for documented and undocumented?
I'm not quite sure if this is a question for me, but I can sort of answer. I don't know the percentage, definitely. Typically these workers come to me after they've already been a victim of crime. So percentage wise, I have no idea. But for the documented versus undocumented part of the question, technically all H-2A workers are documented if they come on an H-2A visa. So that basically is the answer to the question. You can't be undocumented and be here on a visa because that is your documentation. Of course, with the people that I am representing for different kinds of visas, that's basically just applying for a different type of status after you've had an H-2A visa, if that makes sense.
Yeah, just to add a little background to that. So, we ourselves have now been, doing recruitment since for H2A specifically since 2016. And we've moved close to about maybe 12,000 workers over that time. And in our experience, it's really been about 15% of the workers we've come across wanted to live in the United States. And I would say the majority of those individuals tend to be 18 to 26. They kind of have this expectation and aspiration on this image of what it would be like. And that usually tends to be due to their exposure to technology, YouTube, social media. And so, in that sense, we have heard from younger folks that interest. I would say a lot of the folks, usually from even as young as 24 to 25, if they have families, and this is like kids and a wife, or the wife has a husband and kids there, they want to come back to their community. And I would say a large majority have also recognized, especially since the pandemic, how expensive it is to live in the US. So a lot have actually very much wanted to return year after year back home because they're able to see how far their money goes. Now, I do believe that the percentage of folks wanting to migrate to the US, it does increase when they're not given trainings and understanding their rights and have had to pay exorbitant fees. That I think that percentage ends up jumping up closer to like 80% that abandon their contract when they've come here through some type of debt peonage. And that's because they have no other means to pay for that debt, and going back home is not going to resolve that. And so that's where you start to get to see this huge flux of folks that abandon contracts. But normally, I would say H-2A workers do tend to want to protect their opportunity to come back and forth. Um, and then, yeah, I would say, yeah, just like Casey said, if you're here on H-2A, you're here on a legal visa. If you abandoned your contract, then yes, you're now undocumented. And if you wanted to try to pursue that, you would probably be banned for 10 years before you would be able to pursue any type of legal recourse for another visa or citizenship or any of those realities, unless, like Casey said, you're applying for a U visa or have some extenuating circumstances that denote why you might be able to seek asylum or stay here.
I also want to add really briefly, because I've had a lot of people ask me this: undocumented workers that are here often want to apply for this visa. You cannot apply for this visa inside the country. You have to be recruited from Mexico or Guatemala. It has to be from another country. And part of the recruitment is that they go through your background extensively. So they need to make sure that you don't have extensive deportations or anything on your record that might show that you'll come in and overstay, right? So it's not that easy for just anybody to apply for H-2A visa.
Yeah, I think across the nation, nationally, it is the folks who cross the border without documents that are looking for the possibilities of being able to stay here. And so less so in the H-2A program, just because the nature of it, it was created as a temporary work visa to advantage people so that they could literally return to their home countries. And even besides Guatemala and Mexico, a number of the Central American countries and South American countries, as well as Haiti and Jamaica. Haiti and Jamaica folks come into Florida quite a bit So they're opening doors for H-2A recruitment in other countries as well. So
This next question is for Joe, but I also want to encourage you all to submit more questions. But Joe, someone wants to know, do most of the farmers want to work with Cierto?
I mean, I would say when we first started initially, no. Coming from the United Farm Workers, there was this stigma that we're trying to Trojan horse the union onto the farm. Now, look, I come from a union background, so I want folks to understand their rights, and we're going to do whatever we can to ensure they know that. And so our initial clients that we received were folks that had trafficking issues on their farms. And so we went and just to let folks know, right, when we started this work, we knew that folks weren't going to be necessarily open, and recognizing that less than 1% of agricultural workers are under union contracts, right? So this is an industry that's very difficult to bring representation and to ensure workers have their rights. And so with all that information, our focus on how to really pull the levers for folks to create change in this system was to look at who has power. When you look at the supply chain, it's retailers like Costco, Walmart, Kroger, Albertsons, Target, McDonald's who want to continue to grow. And for them to grow, they need to have continuity of supply and brand integrity. The last thing they want are articles from The Guardian about the shrimp industry, articles from the LA Times about the tomato industry and how workers are plagued and consumers are purchasing products that have been harvested in undignified ways and indentured servitude. And I'm sure how much of you have heard modern slavery. So it was that call to action that we gave to retailers. And with that, they were willing, and Costco was actually the first retailer that was willing to open its doors and say, hey, let's pilot this, because it was a theory initially what we were trying to do. And they gave us our initial clients. And we're fortunate to say that over the last 8 years, some of those clients have now become the preferred vendors for these retailers. And what I'd like to really share with folks here, I think the key that I have to share with folks is that when we start engaging with these farmers and employers, it's really about a 2 to 3 year bell curve of establishing a relationship with these workers and helping them understand that when you have workers that are educated, understand their role, and are actually feeling like they're part of helping you grow, then you actually start to recognize the value and expertise. And so what we've been able to now see over the last 8 years is build an understanding that this is what's going to provide a better running operation, agricultural operation, workers that are going to be content and that are going to share. And one of the pitches we used to always give to retailers was, how would you feel if you could confidently send a New York Times reporter, a Guardian reporter to any farm in the US and not have a fear about what these workers are going to say? That's the type of transparency and dignity that we're wanting to systemically change within the H-2A program. Is it possible? I don't know. Are we trying to make inroads? Yes. But with that, we've been able to demonstrate that it's possible. We've been able to now create in 4 different regions in Mexico that you can travel without having to pay any fees. One other reality that I did want to share with folks is that the way we operate is that we make sure that there is no monetary transaction between the worker and Cierto. So all the transaction monetarily happens with the employer to be abiding by rules and regulations. And in turn, that actually helps us create better due diligence, minimize the vulnerability and risk for employers, and knowing that there is no need to transfer money. And this gives a better assurance for workers that they don't need to take out loans to be able to arrive here. And what this has allowed is for workers to be able to exercise their voice and expertise once at the farm, actually creating a win-win scenario for folks. And what it really comes down to is basic organizing, right? And what I was taught during the farm worker movement. And it's these realities, like I said, and like we said, what we recommend is supporting employers, being able to purchase products. And so for those of you that are out there and are consumers and are thinking, well, how can I even start to figure this out? I'd say check out brands that have labels that are farm worker assured, such as the Equitable Food Initiative, or brands that are certified fair trade. In my experience and having visited farms all throughout Central South America, Europe, and Northern Africa, it's those farms that have been certified by these type of companies that actually have the best protections for workers. Is there still more we can do? Yes. But that's how we've been able to, and because of that, and our demonstration to show how we can increase productivity and break away from this human rights issue of, oh, protecting farm workers is only a human rights issue, right? Yes, that's how it starts because we're reacting to the problems we're seeing. But when workers are given the tools, the skills, and the ability to share their voice, they actually end up bringing a more productive harvest, better ideas, and improving overall operations. And we've been able to document that. And now starting to create the business case as to why human rights can actually lead to higher productivity and better economic gains. Unfortunately, that we have to put it in that lens, but we do, right? Because we know that at the end of the day, if it doesn't impact the economic bottom line, folks are just going to continue to see this as an extra and not something necessary. And that's the unfortunate reality. But due to that, we have had farmers that are now very much interested because they're realizing as inflation continues to grow and as prices increase, the H-2A program is expensive. And so folks want to be able to bring workers that are actually going to be able to fulfill their need in a way that's going to ensure their brand integrity and continuity of supply. I know that was a lot, but I hope that made sense.
And let me just add to that we're really grateful for Joe being here today. There are other farm worker partners who have recruitment offices in Mexico and other places. For example, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, and even at one point, I think the Coalition of Immokalee Workers was recruiting H-2A workers. And so, like you said earlier, the number of farm workers covered under a union contract or whatever is 1%. The number of farm workers covered in food certification programs like the Equitable Food Initiative or the Fair Food Program of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, or Milk with Dignity that covers dairy workers with migrant justice, still we're less than 5% of the total farm workers in the US. So it's really good work, and I'm glad it's growing. It's really important.
We have 3 questions. This next one is also for Joe. It kind of piggybacks off of what you just answered, so it probably won't take you very long. Yes, we're all consumers on this call, but we have a lot of people on this webinar who are also connected to the agricultural industry as well. So this person asks, would it be helpful for us to contact local farmers and let them know about Cierto, especially if they are looking for H-2A workers or workers?
No, thank you for the question, and I really appreciate that, and don't want to come off as a sales pitch at all, but we're here to support any farms that want to be able to do what we say is that want to do the H-2A program the right way and want to be recognized for it. And so one of the realities that we see ourselves is, instead of just focusing on organizing farm workers, we kind of see ourselves on trying to organize and work with farmers and to be able to have those be recognized that are doing things the right way. And that those are the folks that should receive more purchase orders in business. So if there are any employers or farmers or folks that are looking to employ H-2A workers, H-2B workers, TN visas, we'd be happy to be able to support them. If they already have a recruiter, we're happy to be able to afford our verification process to bring them further due diligence and transparency, right? So it doesn't necessarily be that we have to recruit, but we can offer any type of support. And at the same time, I think that we have various resources as well to just educate the industry. So at a minimum, if it's not business, how can we further educate folks so that they have the tools in place to make better decisions? And so, yes, I would say happy to connect with folks. And just to let folks know, we are never the employer of record. So we're not a farm labor contractor employer. So we actually provide, and we establish ourselves and provide in establishing a relationship with these employers. So currently we provide labor to Washington, California, Arizona, Colorado, the Dakotas, New York, and New Jersey. So we fortunately do have the capacity and capability to provide anywhere in the country, and are always looking forward to being able to expand in other areas and support farmers that want to do things the right way.
Thank you for that, Joe. And hopefully by next week, we will send out a recording of this webinar, but we'll also give you some resources in that email, and we'll make sure to put Cierto's information. So if somebody does want to make those connections, they can do so. This next question, I think, could be for any of the panelists. It's a long one, so let me know if you need me to repeat anything. How do you approach farm workers to gather data from them? One of the presenters said their outreach manager goes to farms and surveys them, but could they have a little bit more detail? Do you offer incentives to get information from farm workers? Do you wait until they are done with work or reach out to them one-on-one? And how willing are they to talk to people who are doing these surveys?
That's a really good question. It depends. So we know where all of the workers are because, as it was mentioned earlier in the presentation, the Department of Labor is the one that is certifying these workers to be there. So when it's not the season for the workers to be there, the outreach manager does research to see which farms have how many employees, and then the outreach manager goes and talks with the workers. There's no kind of incentive. We don't give them anything. It's just, hey, did you know that you have a right to be paid every 2 weeks and you should be given copies of your pay stubs and just generic things like that. And their willingness to talk to us also depends, which normally is a red flag. If they don't want to talk to us at all, that could mean that they're being threatened by their employer. It could mean that they're not comfortable, something like that. But most of the time they are pretty willing, and most of the time there aren't any issues. And it really just depends on the place and it depends on the workers. But we're not really gathering data from them per se. It's more of just like ensuring that they know what their rights are in Indiana.
Yeah, no, I agree with Casey. I think it very much depends. And my experience, just in general, when before we even started Cierto and I was engaging H2A workers, because one of the biggest issues we had at the farm work movement was that a lot of contract farms were utilizing H2A workers to displace domestic workers. And in turn, H2A workers weren't necessarily required to pay dues on union farms. So that's how you would technically displace the union, right? And so that's kind of why I was brought in to try to figure this out, right? And so that workers could understand, hey, if you're going to a unionized farm, there's a reason it's unionized. And so I think, but in our experience when I was engaging H2A workers, most of them would not talk to me, especially if they had come with a specific recruiter. I would say, and a common practice was, you talk with your recruiter or you talk with your farm labor contractor, and that's it, right? And if anyone's coming or approaching you, you let us know. There tends to be a very tight grip on what these workers are exposed to. And I think that's primarily one of the issues of why they're so isolated. And we have so many issues where there's camps where folks are in very segregated areas, limited access to humans, and where you tend to get folks that fall into alcoholism or drugs, right? And so I think it's been an issue in trying to engage workers. And then I would challenge you to go and seek out any data, white papers, reports on H2A, and you're hard pressed to find anything with more than 100 workers. And I think the mere fact is that folks have seen this and have only reacted to the problems, and there hasn't been a concerted effort to try to collect data to demonstrate the reality. And so at Cierto, we actually do interview all of the workers, a large majority of the workers that we recruit every year. We actually have an impact, a monitoring and evaluation team that goes down and has family visits with the workers. And what we mean by family visits, this is what we adopted back in the farm worker movement from when it started, is spending time with the families to understand what are the impacts, is this positive or not. And the way we do that is we pick a sample portion from each region that we recruit so that we can kind of come up with an impact for folks to see what's the reality. But once again, we're only one organization, and I would say the majority of folks don't do this. I would say the majority of workers that are recruited in Mexico don't meet anyone until they get to the counselor office, whether it be in Tijuana or Monterrey. So it's not the common practice, and I would say we would be hard pressed to find folks that actually interview H2A workers on a consistent basis. Oh, and then one last point there. I would say when we started, most workers didn't believe us. So when I told workers that we weren't going to charge them to come on the H2A program, they thought, oh, you're giving us, some type of rigmarole so that then you can do something to us later. And so we had workers that had about 90,000 pesos in their sock because they hadn't paid us to come on an H-2A contract. And I'll never forget, we had Elizabeth who came from Irapuato who told us, well, I thought that you guys were going to sell me at a sex auction in Tijuana, which is why I had the money to try to bribe you guys in case you did. So these are just some of the realities, right? And in knowing that, still chose to migrate. So, I mean, to understand and put yourself in that position, what type of vulnerability do you have to be experiencing that you're willing to risk your life and still have a set amount of money in your sock at the hopes of not being trafficked? And this is the type of reality that I want you guys to think about when we look at our produce, when we look at those, and how do we start to do something that we can make a change. And I feel very fortunate for the National Farm Worker Ministry of sharing this knowledge with you all and helping bring attention to it. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges is that folks just don't know. And so as this program continues to grow, and unfortunately, I believe it's going to exceed the Bracero program in 1954, we're going to have to continue to bring attention to it because egregious issues are only increasing and there's only more and more folks that are jumping into the program because it's an easy way to exploit and make a lot of money as well. So I appreciate you all taking the time. Thanks.
We
Thanks,
have,
Joe.
oh,
Uh,
we
I
have
just
two
I,
more questions.
I just want to add to that, Rose. Sorry. You know, there's a reason why these workers are often in isolated areas. Yes, it is public uh, where they're supposed to be residing. Their contracts are made available to the public. These workers are supposed to get contracts when they're coming in a language that they can read. But as we mentioned, you know, sometimes a lot of them don't know how to read or write. And sometimes, you know, there's language barriers. There's a lot of different barriers that happen. Many of them don't even get their contracts, but there's a reason why they are in isolated areas to make it harder for you to reach out to them. A lot of the times the addresses are rural addresses, hard to find on GPS. I've encountered in many of my attempts to do outreach to farm workers that there are signs that will say we shoot first and ask questions later. And although these workers are allowed to have visitation because they're basically, you know, living on the property and they have that right to have company, they're under heavy surveillance. I've had H2A workers call me and tell me I'm talking to you anonymously and I only have 2 minutes to share, that we have no water and we have no bathrooms and we're working in extreme heat, working more than 16 hours a day. And they'll tell me you cannot visit me because we're under surveillance. They take our shoes away at night. um, it's hard to build trust with them because all of them are coming with this fear and it's an opportunity for them to make money. One of the first workers that I spoke to said to me, you have to understand that the amount of money that we make, even though it's not the amount that was promised in the contract, it's more than what we would have made in Mexico. And if we complain, then our boss will put us on a list and share that list with other employers. We'll no longer have an opportunity to be employed through this. So there's a lot of retaliation, a lot of blacklisting. There's, like I said, they're under heavy surveillance, and the conditions that they live in. You know, it's if you were to see what I've seen, you would understand, you know, why it's so important for us to highlight these stories and to bring awareness to what's happening to these workers. And I'm really grateful for the work that Joe is doing because you have to build relationships with them in order for them to trust you. And because of the work that he's doing, we have seen an increase of HOA workers reporting the conditions that they're living in, recognizing that they do have rights. A lot of them think that they don't have rights because we have false narratives here in this country that label immigrants and stereotype them. And so then they come in thinking, I don't have rights, right? So thank you to both Casey and Joe. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay, this will need to be a rapid response based on time. Can someone speak to the rub between how H-2A programs impacted local farm workers, displacing them and risking lower wages, many of whom are also Latinx of varying documentation status?
I think it's a big challenge. I think a lot of local farmers struggle with the H2A program because it's really expensive. So in our experience, the smaller farmers and the medium-sized farmers don't have the capital, right? Which is why you end up getting folks that sometimes can offer you a cheaper rate, but it's because they're subsidizing the true cost. And so I think also when workers are displaced, unfortunately, the folks that are willing to take them are folks that need that assistance, right? We still know that there's a lot of the agricultural workforce that is undocumented and that continues to work in the United States. And so I think that there's, real quickly, yes, there is a rub. It's unfortunate, but I think it's something that continues to exist. And I don't think we're going to be able to get rid of until there's a larger reform in general for the agricultural workforce.
So I want to add to that. It has been a situation, and I've seen it all over the United States. Undocumented workers that have been working here in this country for more than 10 years are now having to compete with H2A workers, especially females and older people, right? Because H2A workers are younger men in their prime, and we've heard in the past, if you review or go to our social media, our YouTube page, you'll hear from windmill mushroom workers who have talked about being discriminated against and being kind of forced out of their employments and being replaced with H2A workers. We also have heard, from states where they have already implemented overtime for workers, that growers are not wanting to pay workers overtime and are opting to bring in H2A workers to fulfill those hours. So workers are seeing that they're going up against each other, and it's a shame because both of them are just all they want is to work. And so that's kind of what we have been seeing.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. It was wonderful to have our participants. And then I want to extend another thank you to our presenters, as well as a thank you to Rosie Shahar with National Farm Worker Ministry for doing technical assistance on the back end. As I said, we will be sending an email with a recording and then some follow-up information. We would love for you all to stay connected with the National Farm Worker Ministry. You can join our email or connect with us on our social media. And we also would love for you to share our social media as well. We have great information. It really is the best way to stay up to date on action items that people can take to support farm workers. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe and Casey, for all the valuable information that you shared with us today.
Yeah, thank you a lot. Appreciate it.